Hey guys, welcome back to the OPD podcast. It's just going to be me today with our guest, Austin, here. So Joe had a family emergency. It literally just happened. So he is going to be out today. We wanted to go ahead and get this recorded, though, since we did have our guests lined up. It'll be a little bit shorter than usual, but it's a really good topic. I think you guys are still going to enjoy it. So today we're going to have on female physique coach, Kayla Duncan. We've had a female coach on before and talked about some female-specific topics, so we're going to do that again today. Kayla, last I know we haven't talked in a little bit, but you work with exclusively females. I don't know if you still do, but I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself. Just give us, background on your competition history, your coaching history, and all that, so everyone knows what's going on there.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me on, Austin. I'm always so excited to just kind of catch up and talk shop. As you said, yep, I'm a female physique coach, and I do still exclusively work with females, and I have since 2010. I own a company called the OmniFit, and we have two other coaches on staff, Jody V and Taylor Bloxham, and we're a fitness coaching company that we really specialize in helping women embrace sustainable change in this, like what we call kind of an instant results culture. So I have a love for physique development and bodybuilding. I got my start back in 2007 before I feel like Facebook even existed, or at least I wasn't a part of it yet. So, what fuels us and what kind of keeps us going is far beyond just the social media. So I actually started in a division called Fitness Model, and then it kind of turned into bikini. And I won my pro card in that division in a natural bodybuilding federation called the SNBF down in Georgia. And then took many years off and didn't hit the stage again until 2015, where I competed in figure. And it was a ton of fun because, what I saw firsthand and what we teach all the women that we get to work with is that natural muscle takes time. I mean, even enhanced muscle takes time, but specifically for women in that desire to have that, round muscles, it just takes time. And so I got to kind of live that firsthand. So now we're like maybe 15 years after I've ever been touched a weight before. And so here we are.
Yeah. And if you guys, Kayla's undercutting herself a little bit. She has a really good physique. So if you guys see her, we'll obviously link you up to her after the podcast. She does have a pretty good, pretty solid physique. I think you competed last, 2 years ago?
Yeah, 2015. Yep.
Wow. Almost 3 years then.
Yeah, almost 3 years. It's 2018 now. That's crazy.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I know. I just, as you know, you probably know, I just competed recently, and this will be pretty much my 10th year competing. So, yeah, it's crazy.
It is so crazy. You look like a different person.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I'm going on – well, you're older than me now, but, I mean, I'll be – before you know it, I'll be 30. And then it'll be masters, and then it'll be all that all that good stuff. But,
yeah, totally.
So today we wanted to talk about, obviously, like I said, a female-specific topic. We wanted to touch on some of the complications females run into hormonally when trying to lose body fat specifically. So whether that's contest prep or just general fat loss. I mean, obviously, the more extreme someone's going, the leaner they're trying to get, the further away from their natural body fat set point they are, the more they're going to run into these complications. So we want to talk to you guys a little bit about what some of the common ones are, our thoughts on them, maybe how we can try to mitigate them, and what we need to express to our clients when we're, getting into these phases. Because I know me personally, I'm adamant about telling my clients, hey, we're kind of getting to a point where we're probably going to run into some negative feedback here. It's really not preventable at this point. I mean, but at the same time, we're looking to not keep clients in these phases too long. Brief, short-term negatives aren't necessarily a bad thing, and they're not preventable in most cases if you want to get lean. But we obviously don't want to keep our clients in these negative environments too long. So when you're working with the client, let's start with prep first, because I know a lot of people that's where most of the negatives are going to happen. when you're getting close to a show or post show, menstrual cycles, obviously. So that's the biggest one. What are some of the things you're going to tell your clients or talk to them about in terms of menstrual cycles or regaining menstrual cycles?
Yeah, I think an overarching thing that we have to lay the foundation for before we can even have this conversation is someone's past dieting history and what their menstrual cycle history has been. That's going to set the stage for, as a coach, or even as I always encourage my clients, I know you do too, to be very insightful with their own biofeedback, that, I'm helping steer the ship, but they've lived in their body their whole life. So they're going to be able to, they need to know that some of these things that they're experiencing are normal. I've had, several different things in terms of past dieting history. Making sure that they're not dieting too much is going to impact whether or not they have a menstrual cycle, or how quickly some of these negative things are going to begin happening and how far out before they actually reach that goal. I really like to see us dieting for a good chunk of time before someone loses their menstrual cycle and, starts really pushing back on fat loss. Would you say the same?
Yeah, definitely for the most part. And I'm glad you brought up past history, because there's really no cut and dry answer here. I mean, I've literally had girls that they train intensely, they lose their menstrual cycle, like literally just from training intensely, not even necessarily having low body fat. Obviously that's a little bit more extreme. That's not the norm. But on the flip side, I mean, I worked with 2 girls this year. Both of them dieted down to they got their pro card in natural federation, so they weren't enhanced, and they had to get to pretty reasonably low body fats, and they didn't lose at their menstrual cycle at all, which is obviously kind of on the other end of the extreme. You wouldn't typically, you're not going to see that. But as Kayla said, it's going to be trying to minimize that time, and really all that comes down to is just doing the smart things that you would typically do with dieting, not starting in the best place possible, trying to make the process as painless as possible with which we can we can only hope that it becomes that way, but again, I mean, they're going to be extremes. So but the biggest thing, like I said, is probably not necessarily that someone loses it. I don't think that, to me, it's not overly concerning that it happens short term, but post show, I mean, that's really what we need to, where we need to address the issue, make sure that they're getting back to their body fat set points and all of these things. Are you a big proponent of, do you have your clients get lab work done? Are you looking at things like that? Or are you going more by just how they feel or waiting it out? Or how do you typically go about that?
Yeah, in the recent years, and I would say in the last 2 years, I have exercised a lot more caution around female dieting, because after so many years in the industry, I've seen just people they're brutalizing themselves. And so I personally won't take on a prep client without having first done an improvement season with them for at least 6 months to see what is happening. Because what I found is that a lot of people were misreporting, or they just didn't know. I don't think it was, intentional. But that gives us a chance to see, okay, if somebody's functioning and responding what I would consider fairly normal, then I'm probably not going to ask them to go spend all the money on blood work, especially if they do have some type of log that they might have had from their yearly, their doctor, just their regular labs. Before we started prep though, I like to get a baseline. So, and then based on that, I haven't seen yet something that would be a huge red flag to prevent moving into a dieting phase. Because most of the time when I'm working with my clients, I don't really pick a show first. I always say, let's start dieting. Let's see how your body's responding. Let's make sure we're not going to have any hiccups. And after about 8 weeks dieting, maybe even less, maybe 6 weeks dieting, we can kind of see things are moving in the right direction, and we start to take a look at the calendar and, all of that. Now, mind you, I mean, they've looked at the calendar. They pretty much have an idea, but I call it marrying a show date. And I see it just totally ruin physiques and ruin the mindsets of people, because what we see, and typically in females, I see this, is this past dieting history negatively impacts their body's response. And then they start to taper on the line of doing some dangerous stuff, all for some stupid show date that they could easily just do next year, or, go a year without dieting. So I put an emphasis on blood work, but what I have found is that unless there's a really big problem, the body responds how it's supposed to. And so I've tried to be very, very intuitive with the biofeedback that they give me, and teaching them what biofeedback is. What is it that they're looking for?
Yeah, I like that. And I like the fact that you mentioned going through an actual phases of surplus and deficit before you even approach a prep, which I think, especially for novice competitors, anyone that's never competed or maybe only competed once or twice, I think that's especially important, because not only psychologically can they see how they feel with a little more body fat and a little more food or a little less, and feel those transitions, but it also just goes to show, hey, this is what your body's probably going to do in these phases. And for the most part, I don't really like, if I go through those and I have someone, and I'm sure you probably agree, if I'm able to do it and build up their caloric base and make sure metabolically, like, everything's at the best it's going to be for that person, I'm pretty comfortable going into the contest prep. Like you said, I'm not too awfully worried about it. Especially unless it gets a little dicey if you're working with like a natural female that's maybe getting close to menopause or something, and some of the hormones are starting to downregulate, and you're starting to get into a whole different ballgame. I know that I've been lucky enough to work with a few people really long-term, like long enough to literally see their hormones change, so we're talking like 5+ years, when they're already maybe mid-30s, and then they're going into their 40s. And then I can kind of see that pre-menopause and menopause stage. And man, it's crazy how much different someone will respond. And I think that's probably what got me really interested in trying to learn, okay, what is actually going on with the menstrual cycles, like the hormones. I've had girls now working with things like, and you may have seen me post about this before. Have you had any experience using like the Dutch test or any of those tests? Have you seen those? Okay.
No, I haven't at all.
So I talked about it, and I'll just brief it real quick. I've talked about it on some of the other podcasts, and this is something that I literally had no idea about, these testing methods, until I went to my doctor. I go to Dr. Serrano here in Columbus, and, he's always up to date on everything. So they do a really cool hormone test with basically collect your urine, and it's dried urine sample, and they get all 4 points during the day, so we can see cyclical patterns throughout the day. And what that does also is they test your adrenal hormones, like your cortisol and all that stuff on there. Obviously, that's kind of what you're seeing in those waves. But what it also does is it allows you to see all the metabolites that you're excreting through your urine also. So you can literally see, like, think of a good example would be testosterone and then someone's free testosterone. You can see, okay, what are all these hormones doing? Are we converting them correctly? Are we excreting them? Are we actually using them? So that would be something really cool to look into. Like, I love using the Dutch test with like women that are going close to that menopause, or maybe have like PCOS or something like that, where their progesterone and estrogen are skewed, or even just post show, like if they have the funds. It's one of those things where you can order it on your own, like a lot of the other lab tests. I know most, at least here, we have, actually, I should have mentioned this, we have a large UK listener base too. So with this show, so some of this stuff is a little bit harder to get there, but they are able to get most of the lab work. Just being able to see all these hormones and metabolites is super cool. It comes in, if you go on their website, it actually comes in graphs and charts, and it's illustrated really nicely, and you're able to see it all on there. So that's pretty neat. Something cool to check out. And doctors can obviously order that stuff, but you know how that goes sometimes. So
yeah, it's almost more stress than it's worth.
Yeah. Now I wanted to get your views too, because I mentioned the clients as they get a little bit older. So I've worked with through like doing these Dutch tests and even just basic blood work, when I've gotten these gals that are, going through menopause, and now they're in menopause, inevitably a lot of them end up with just really low hormones because that's what the process does, naturally, just like a male, hormones decline. Have you had any gals that have had or used hormone replacement pretty regularly?
No competitors that I've worked with, but a lot of general athletes. And really, I work with a lot of past competitors too. So we kind of look at it as you put your body through the ringer, and we're looking for optimum health. How do you feel the best, have the most energy? A huge complaint is hair falling out when this is happening. And the mainstream doctors tend to put all of this on the thyroid, and they don't necessarily pay attention as much to the adrenals. And one of the things I wanted to bring up was, in terms of any dieting history, no matter what age that you are, is not ignoring chronic life stressors that you might not think are stressful. There's a ton of people that are like, I'm not stressed, I'm fine. And you're like, okay, cool, tell me about your day. And they're like, well, I wake up at 5 a.m. and I do this, and I have my quiet time, and then I do cardio. And they don't even stop talking. And they're like, and then I go to bed at 10. And you're like, okay, well, on paper, it looks like, because, competing attracts these type A driven people. It's who we are. It's who I am. It's who you are. It's just the environment that type of sport attracts. But we have to be so careful to have some restorative work in there. And I know you post a lot about this. And I just had a coaching call earlier today, a non-competitor, but again, someone who's very driven, very physique oriented, that participates in going through dieting cycles, surpluses, that has physique goals, and has approached that age where hormones do play a huge factor. And the biggest, I guess the most impactful thing that I've seen people be able to address, because you can only address hormones so much before your body just begins to auto-regulate, is their life stress. Yeah. And when you're trying, even if it is bioidentical hormones, whether it's creams or whether it's sublingual or whatever form that you're choosing to do to extrinsically impact your hormones, if your life is so stressful and too demanding, your body's not going to respond optimally to those treatments anyways, and you're going to get really, really frustrated. So I've seen that happen a lot. Yeah,
it's funny you mentioned that, because I get really into these, and I'm sure it's the same way. It's like you see an issue and then you want to figure out, okay, why is this happening? And then you get so engrossed in one topic for a month or whatever.
Yeah.
So I normally a lot of it stemmed from stuff that I'd done to myself on accident, just not beating myself up essentially. So, I was going through and trying to figure out, why are these hormone levels off, when it's I don't think I'm overtraining. My nutrition's good, obviously. I'm doing all of these things. And for me, I'm on prescribed hormone replacement. So it's it
should be pretty stable.
Right. Why am I seeing, for example, easy ones? Why am I seeing my estrogen all of a sudden go up when I have stable testosterone levels? Why is it converting more? Why is my thyroid off in the off season when I'm eating all this food? Why is this stuff happening? And I've noticed it in other people too, other than, and it's normally in a case where it's an acute situation, it happens quick. It's not like they had, their thyroid was slowly downregulating over the course of 10 years or something. And I started really getting into feedback loops of hormones and figuring out, so stress, inflammation, a lot of these cells that uptake the hormones and things, they don't respond. I've had people that have had a super easy example is high blood sugars from being stressed. For one, your cortisol and adrenaline will inevitably cause blood sugar to go up, but also the cells that are uptaking the glucose, they're not responsive. They're inflamed. They're not responding. You lose insulin sensitivity. So there's that. Thyroid, I've had people now, when I get thyroid taken, if I have someone that's really, really stressed, I'll have them test their reverse T3, which is basically the inactive thyroid. Well, now I'm seeing these people with super high reverse T3. So I'm like, okay, so
that's where it's going.
So all of this is converting into useless a useless hormone. And
Mm-hmm.
it's really all just boiled down to, stress. So it's like anytime that I have someone, if something happens quickly like that,
Mm-hmm.
somebody like a hormonal change or they feel different, it's almost always stress, because our endocrine system, like how it naturally downregulates, like how a guy's testosterone falls and how a women's hormones fall, that stuff naturally happens really slow.
Right.
It doesn't happen in a month. Like that's not how it works. I mean,
No, or even 6 months when someone's like, what happened last year that I gained 20 pounds, or the reason why I can't lose this weight? Like it usually runs much deeper than some type of hormonal change. It's usually this chronic something that isn't being addressed.
no, you're right. You're totally right. And like you said, even stuff like your hormone replacement isn't going to work optimally when you have, these negative feedback loops. And you mentioned too, one that I actually had success with, and I don't, us as coaches, like there's this fine line between coaching and playing doctor type of
Right.
thing. You know what I mean? So I'm always like, don't go against what your doctor's saying. This is my input. This is for entertainment purposes, whatever, take it for what it's worth type of thing.
Right.
But I have had a lot of success with like post-show regaining their period a little bit quicker using over-the-counter progesterone cream, like a really low dose. You can actually get it from Now Foods, like the Now Foods
Mm-hmm.
brand, or there's a
Right.
lot of,
Yeah, I know Arbonne had
yeah,
a
it's super cheap.
regulated brand that was really high quality.
Yeah, and it doesn't, like I said, it's super cheap. We're normally talking in like it's anywhere from maybe 10 to 50 milligrams at most, whereas like if someone's getting prescribed progesterone for a progesterone deficiency because of the menstrual cycle's off, it's going to be anywhere from clear up to like 400 plus milligrams.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, that might be something for people to look into. Again, ask your doctor if you are, if you do want to maybe bump start your cycle a little bit quicker. Basically, it's just going to be used during the ovulation phase, like close to the period when you would naturally have increased progesterone. That
Mm-hmm.
is when it would be used. That's all you're going to do. It's not something that you have to use all the time. I know my clients with PCOS that I've worked with, we've been able to almost completely regulate their menstrual cycle through just the use of progesterone cream. And
Mm-hmm.
they were prescribed a progesterone, an oral, usually like an oral, or they would have a topical that they would put like localized that would be, used. But typically they would have like an oral higher dose that would jumpstart their cycles. And then they were able to kind of transition into just using the over-the-counter cream. That's another thing that picked up from the doc. So he's like, the creams work really well. You can just use them basically close to your period time. It gets the person to ovulate. They have a normal cycle. They're good to go.
Right.
And like I said, I think Now Foods has it, and you can probably get that brand. Goodness, I would imagine overseas as well. So
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine. I'm not sure what's regulated in the UK, but yeah, I would just like exercise caution in terms of, I think a lot of times we can get lost in the weeds dabbling with, words that are too big for our vocabulary. Like, you're like, oh, let's order these labs and let's do all this stuff. And I don't ever want anybody to overlook the powerful life changes that can happen regarding physical and emotional stressors, and that like gut brain connection of having those restorative times, not just physically, but also mentally. Because when I know for women, we can't continue talking about this topic without talking about their judgment on themselves, especially physically. So if we're talking about a show, you're talking about approaching it, you're feeling like you're not going to make it, you're not going to be on time. That's one level of stress in addition to your normal life. And then vice versa, if it's after a show and your hormones aren't necessarily optimal and your appetite is crazy and you're putting on body fat, like even if you're trying to do things so methodically, just don't get lost in the weeds. Anybody that's listening, and run to your health food store to grab some progesterone cream when you really should be spending an extra 30 minutes in the morning to like get your mind right.
Yeah, no, and that just goes back to the stress thing.
Yep.
I've been on this in stress. The thing about stress too is you mentioned the one thing that you mentioned that I didn't get to comment on because we kept talking was you mentioned that people think they feel okay and because they're used to something. I call that, I don't know if this is like the actual technical term for it, but I always call it subjective well-being
That's good.
because you get so used to the way you feel. Like inevitably that could be feeling like crap. I mean, you can get used to feeling like crap. Granted,
Absolutely.
yeah. And granted, if someone asks you, you're gonna be like, yeah, I'm pretty tired or whatever, but this is, what's the normal response? But this is normal for me, and it's so easy to get caught up in that whole, like I said, basically getting used to feeling like crap. And then
Right.
if you get into that train of thought, then your stress response is terrible. And I can see it in updates. And if you're, as a coach, like someone that does it long enough and they're intuitive and they watch these things, you can tell in an update how people handle stress, and they don't stop and think before they send their updates. They fly off the handle at everything. They're stressed out. And it can be little things like, my weight's up today, like their whole update is just, they're freaked out. And obviously they're probably constipated and they didn't sleep the night before, and who knows what else.
Right. There's so many factors.
Right. Exactly. So, oops. But yeah, that whole subjective well-being thing, I think, gets people a lot. So like you said, stopping, evaluating, write down. Even one little thing that I did that helped me was trying to figure out the difference between being busy and being productive. Like, how much of this busyness is actually productive? And I was able to, because like I said, I went through the whole basically adrenal insufficiency where my adrenals were just tanked. And a lot of people ask me like, well, what did you do differently to change, in your day? I'm like, well, I have to get my work done. Okay. Cause I have to pay my bills. Like, this is my workload. This is what I have to do.
Right.
But I was actually able to consolidate things a lot better and figure out and close a lot of gaps that weren't productive, that weren't doing anything productive. And I filled those in with other things like, soft belly breathing or meditation or just sitting there doing nothing.
Yeah. No, you mentioned soft belly breathing. It sounds so silly because I think like in the physique world, we want to be like, this is so intense and this is so great and whatever. And you're like, you want me to lay on my back and do what? Like, we call it crocodile breathing too, like filling up your belly like a crocodile does. And I've sent so many, like, what I consider very funny videos to clients over the years of, and like, that's their to do that week. Like, right. That's their assignment. That's their action step and they've like not been very nice when they write back sometimes. Like, this is all you want. Like, my body is not responding and you're telling me to breathe, and we got to hop on the phone but it's powerful. It's powerful stuff. It really is.
And they think, and it's like, you think you're like brushing them off because you're giving them some like kooky thing to do. But it's the more that I do this, the more I realize how important that balance is between, and from a sciencey standpoint, because a lot of our audience really likes the science. We talk about on the show a lot. We talk about your autonomic nervous system, sympathetic versus parasympathetic. Really, in reality, we only want sympathetic drive when we really need it. Training, maybe here and there if you really need to get a lot of work done or something and you're going to use extra stimulants or something. But in reality, like, we want to be pretty much parasympathetic most of the time outside of that.
Right.
It's a really powerful thing. And it's in what I learned with the stressors is that it's normally not the big chronic, it's normally not like the big acute stressors that because those things are easy to see. Like your dog dies.
Right. A car accident.
You're going to have a really rough day. You got in a fender bender or something in traffic. So things like that, like, you're obviously going to see those and they're easy to, okay, I need to calm down. Yeah. Okay. Easy to identify. It's all these people that going back to the subjective well-being, that all of these little things that they get mad about every single day, that they get frustrated about, that they have zero control over, those things are the ones that add up. You're waiting in line to get coffee in the morning. You are at work and someone makes you mad. You're like Kale and I answering emails and you're really starting to get frustrated at something. Well, you've got to be able to identify those things. And if you can't, that's where all of it, that's what really gets you. And that's what adds up. And that's where, you know, your cortisol is elevated maybe just 25%, but if it's elevated 25%, 100% of the time, well, your poor little adrenals are going to be right. Yeah. So I'm sure you see that, because I know like me, you kind of like to pay attention to those things. So yeah.
No, absolutely. And what's kind of influences that is like the season in which people like to diet. You know, since I do work with women, and women tend to be the thermometer of their families. This is something that Coach Taylor talks about a lot, and Coach Taylor works with me over at the OmniFit, but she talks about how women are the temperature of or the thermometer of their families. And if you think back to even home life, or maybe how Jerica, like, women carry so much like internal pressure of like, okay, because we're always thinking, we can never be in an empty box. So we're always thinking about, you know, work, duties, mom life, being a significant other, whatever it is, and that's going to influence our behavior. And so if you add a contest prep or some type of additional effort, because any type of fat loss phase is going to take additional effort, extra preparing, you know, you can't just go grab a candy bar to quote unquote fit your macros, things like that, you know, and expect to bring an optimal physique. Plus it's a financial burden. You're making an investment in something that you want to achieve. And so you put a lot of weight on yourself. And if you do that all the time, you're going to impact like what your family is, what your home life is, how your significant other gets to experience life. And so pay attention, listeners, if you're planning on a competition or any type of fat loss phase, what that season of life is like. If you're a mom and it's soccer season, don't plan a competition in the midst of soccer season when you know you want to be at your kid's soccer game every night after work. You know, like there's just certain things that you can kind of put a asterisk beside on your calendar and say, this is probably not the best time to do that.
Yeah. So bottom line there is trying to have the best environment that you can, and just kind of, so it's kind of like when we periodize training, it's periodizing your prepping and stuff. And it's like,
exactly.
And that's something that I even do with, you know, people talk about like a deload from training. You need to rest, you're beat up, whatever. I almost anymore, like I couldn't tell you the last time that I had a program that said on week 4, we're going to deload. Well, no, it's like I'm having a really stressful week and I feel like crap. I'm like, okay, well, let's take 3 days off. That's just being intuitive and kind of working with your environment. And it's the same thing in prep. And like you mentioned, not picking a show date. All of these things are going to go to the greater good in terms of not having those negative adaptions, because the less stress, you know, the better off you're going to be. I know that was probably the biggest difference in my prep between last year and this year, was that I had, you know, like we talked about, I sold the gym. And that was a huge stressor. It was I wouldn't say that my prep was any easier necessarily, but especially like close to showtime, I didn't have to think. Like I knew that my business was taken care of and on all those things were good. And that made a significant difference in terms of just not worrying about anything.
Right.
And again, very little thing, you wouldn't think that it would actually impact you. But if it's funny because I think that people that I don't know how to phrase this to make it sound not mean, but the people that I probably have the most success with in terms of shows are the people that probably are kind of like I don't even know what you would call it. They're just the very like lazy minded. They don't know a lot. They may not even know a lot about competing. They just listen to what I say. They do, and they're kind of like oh yeah, whatever, you know, it's all good. It would be like the typical like stoner crowd. I'm not saying there's, you know, that's what they are, but yeah,
right.
You know why? Because they don't worry about anything that's insignificant.
Mm-hmm.
They take care of what they need to take care of, and the rest it doesn't matter. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, I envy those people at times because I've had such a hard time figuring out how to be like that and still be productive. But yeah, I know we've gotten a little away from the hormones, but the stress thing it's really, there's really no bigger component to your success in a prep than stress. Because I mean, you can follow exactly what your coach says and have two completely different outcomes at the end if
Absolutely.
if one's chronically stressed and one's not.
Yeah, you mentioned about the deload and like a pre-programmed deload. I was literally just having a conversation with a client today about just that. Is that for this particular client, and there's a couple of resources that are fantastic. Lyle McDonald's The Woman's Book, just a fantastic resource. I literally just keep it to reference because there's so much great research that's referenced that I just can't even keep in my brain all at one time. And if you guys haven't heard of Laura Brydon, Austin, can you put that link in the show notes? Can I send it to you?
Yeah.
Laura Brydon. She specializes in menstrual cycles. And so she has a book. It's called Period Repair Manual. It's fantastic. I heard her on a podcast several years ago and have since just kind of followed her. And she's a naturopathic doctor and really, really focuses on women's health and optimizing their cycle. And when you learn about optimizing your cycle, then it's going to fall right into how to best organize your training, how to best organize your show schedule, all those things. I was just talking with this client earlier today about how when around ovulation time, so if you're not tracking your current cycle days, that is a number one thing to do. Cycle day number one is the day you start your period, and you just auto-populate the days after that. And the next time you start your period starts over cycle day one. So a typical cycle is cycle days 1 through 28. And then that's how you can kind of keep track of when your hormones are and things like that. And if you do get blood drawn, it's important to draw it at a certain time and know what time in your cycle you're drawing it so that you're actually making sense of the data. But we're talking about a deload, and she has really rough pre-ovulation weeks, which is kind of ironic. It's not super common, but we've noticed this from tracking so many months and going, okay, great. Well, we notice your strength plummets. You have no energy. You're super constipated, and that makes it a really tough time to eat. So let's change some things for you during this week. And that, I think, is what's most important about any female, no matter what season of life they're in, premenopause, young in their 20s or in their 40s and 50s, is identifying what's normal for you. And that's why getting blood work over years is also really, really great. Knowing that, I've had my blood work done when I was 18, 25, now I'm 32. So by the time my body starts making any of these changes, I know my own baseline.
Yeah. You mentioned Lyle. Have you read the women's book, the first volume, or seen it?
Yes. That's what I was saying, is that one of the best resources is the women's book. Yeah.
So if you guys are there it is. Yeah. If you guys are interested in that topic, he digs into pretty much. I mean, there's some open-ended stuff in there because, again, like we said, everyone's normal is a little bit different, so you have to take that into consideration. But he does talk about a lot of those differences. And one of the things I like that you mentioned there, and this isn't really possible unless you are really good with biofeedback, is that you can kind of customize a person's programming according to their menstrual cycle and like when they feel really crappy. I mean, some people, there's not much difference, so there's really no need to do anything. And then other people, like, they just feel awful, and I have to kind of periodize training accordingly, which is what you mentioned. So yeah, that was a good mention there, guys. Definitely check out that book. And I think we are coming up on our time. Like I said, today's going to be a little bit shorter since had kind of a funky schedule. So I will go ahead and cut it off here, guys. We'll get everything linked up. The link that Kayla mentioned, we'll get her all linked up on there. Please check her out. Check out the OmniFit, and we will talk to you guys next time.
Hey guys, it's Joe. Just popping in here at the end to offer you guys an apology that I feel like I owe you. Firstly, for not being on this episode and for getting this podcast out so late. So Basically, about 10 minutes before recording this podcast, I had a family emergency that had to rush to the hospital. Had a very sick family member, so we've had a very tough week with that. And also on the same day, I went to donate blood, and they found some irregular results on my blood readings that they do before the test, and I went to hospital myself, and they'd found that I had another flare of stomach ulcers, which I do get recurring. It was causing some esophageal, is that the word? Esophageal bleeding that was causing me to be critically anemic, so I had to have that sorted out as well, and I wasn't feeling too well, and I've been in and out of hospital getting poked and prodded for that, and I've been tied up with the sick family member and helping out all of Jasmine's family over that, so apologies for that, guys, but I'm so glad that this podcast still went through and it was still a killer, even without me there, if you can believe that. So yeah, very sorry, guys, but next week as usual, we have Luke Sando, newly may I say IFBB Pro Luke Sando, newly sponsored Metaform athlete, coming on just to talk shop about all kinds of rubbish and to talk about Metaform, because me, Luke and Austin are all Metaform sponsors, so that would be pretty cool, talking about maybe how we use it and stuff like that. But I'm going to do a little bit of the official stuff now, so thank you to the sponsors that keep this podcast going and make this all possible. Firstly, as I just mentioned, Metaform. That's Metaform's site enhancement. It's the very first of its kind, highly advanced hyaluronic acid-based site enhancement product. Metaform self-dispersing, so you don't get any lumps, clumps, or blurring of condition, or any of those issues. It's water-based, pharmaceutical-grade hyaluronic acid, and lasts up to 18 months, with real minimal applications, especially when compared to other site enhancement products, especially the oil-based that are pretty much just inflammatory and can look really bad and distorted. Metaform is basically dummy-proof, so we love that. Also, Compact Show Day Essentials, www.compact.store. I'm sorry, I should have said Metaform. It's www.mediform.com if you want to order, or holler me on any social media and I'll put you in the Metaform group on Facebook. So compact.store. From bikini competition suits to jewellery, plastic cups and rice cakes, Compact helps competitors during the busiest times of their prep by reducing the time and stress related to getting everything you need in place for your show, so you can focus on what really matters, which is bringing your best package to the stage, which obviously involves being less stressed about having to order loads of stuff. Also, our newest sponsor, UK CBD Oils. That's www.uk-cbdoils.com. UK CBD Oils is a local business based in Middlesbrough here in the UK. It's operating within the legal cannabis market, selling CBD food supplements as an aid to good health. Me and Austin both love CBD oil. They're a member of the Cannabis Trades Association, which represent responsible and ethical companies operating within the law, and they also supply HPLC lab testing for every single batch that they sell, which was the big sort of selling point for me. Our code is OP10 on UK CBD oils. And also shout out to another new sponsor that we've been mentioning that have finally launched. I'm going to get the website and everything over to you guys for the next podcast, that is Team Metal Clothing Co. For all of your gym clothing. You guys are absolutely going to love these guys. Go ahead and Google them and check them out, but I'm going to get all the details and a nice discount for you guys for the next episode. But yeah, that's it. So once again, my apologies, guys, for not being on this podcast, but I'm sure that you all enjoyed it, as it was a killer episode, and the guys handled it really well. So see you guys next week.